For our final panel today, Here Comes the Sun, Solar Solutions Big and Small. I am pleased to announce our moderator, Molly Sarver, who is a planning specialist with the Governor's Center for Local Government Services under the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. Would you please give a warm welcome to Molly? Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. So glad to see so many of you guys sticking around to this. This has been a wonderful day, I think. Fun fact about my family, my mom was once an apprentice to an auctioneer. So I'm going to try and keep that energy, keep things moving fast, get us out of here. But, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Tom Murphy. Tom has an ongoing partnership with the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors on the local implications of utility-scale solar energy across the Commonwealth. He previously served as director of Penn State's Marcellus Center for Outreach and Research, the MCOR, providing leadership to a range of related outreach, energy events, and research activities. Tom has 40 years of experience working with public officials, researchers, industry, government agencies, and landowners. His current work centers on educational consultation and energy transitions, specifically at the convergence of shale gas, RNG, hydrogen, and renewables, with a recent emphasis on the rapidly changing energy paradigm and wider deployment of utility scale solar. So without further ado, let's please give it up for Tom Murphy.
Thank you. And appreciate the fact that many of you are staying here to the very end. It's difficult to be one of the last speakers here at the program. So we appreciate the fact that you're here. The last number of speakers we had, obviously, we were talking about food and a variety of things along those lines. I'd have to tell you, I'm going to talk about energy. We're going to talk about energy in terms of this panel, but I'm trained as an agronomist. You know what an agronomist is? Even my kids don't know what an agronomist is. Trained as an agronomist, but working in the energy field, and I came from the cooperative extension space. So I've been working in a variety of different components. So the food component and the agricultural piece in particular, as we think about the intersection between agriculture and energy, is becoming more and more pronounced. So the skill sets that we're bringing in that regard, I think, are very appropriate. Today, I'm going to talk specifically about utility scale solar, some of the work that we did, as you can hear from the introduction, coming from Penn State, working in the natural gas space. The reason I bring that up is we learned a lot of things from the wave of natural gas development, the Marcellus development that came across Pennsylvania. We're taking many of those lessons and we're applying them to the wave of utility scale solar that we're seeing occurring here within the state as well. Meaning there's some pluses and some minuses, and we're trying to bring all that to the table as we can. My focus is very specifically working with PSATS. If you're not familiar with PSATS, it's Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, referred to as PSATS, a whole lot easier to say that. And the work that I do is working with municipal officials, township, borough, and also with county, particularly in the planning community, as we think about the implications of large-scale solar here in Pennsylvania, as we try to mitigate some of the challenges that we've observed, as we try to find some of the benefits that are there and work through that. So the work that I do is again, it's the extension side of me. Don't take a position, solar good, solar bad. My role is to talk about what are the facts, what are the details, what is the technology, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the opportunities, and when we find those challenges, how do we mitigate through that? So the work very specifically that I get into is we do a 3-hour deep dive type of a program. We did 2 of those earlier this week. We're actually doing one online next week. If you're a PSATS member, you've probably gotten an advertisement about that. 3-hour deep dive, go into all the different bits and pieces, and we end with looking at solar ordinances. Ultimately, that's what I'm getting to, is helping townships try to navigate solar ordinance if they're thinking about that, thinking about accessory solar rooftop type situations, as well as this larger type solar on the ground. In the end, the work, so we do those deeper dive educational type programs, but what I do ultimately is work with individual townships as they try to put together a solar ordinance, or if they have one in place, try to work through that with them to bring it up to speed, make it a little bit more contemporary if it's dated, and try to bring in so many examples because the process has changed over the course of time. The other thing that we do, and would have been great to have done it here today, we just didn't have enough time, is we also put together a virtual solar tour. What we find with most municipal officials that are making the decisions about solar permitting within their jurisdictions is they've never seen it. They've never been inside the fence. They've seen some pictures, they've driven down the road, et cetera, but they've never actually had the chance to go inside. And often what we find them saying is, we just didn't know that. So it's that statement, they just don't know what they don't know. So that's what we try to do with an immersive solar tour. We set it up with virtual reality, but we can also do it on the screen, and that's typically what we do, and it's very helpful for municipal officials and again, county as well. There's a variety of concerns with this large-scale solar. You can see the list that's on the screen there. Of course, I'm not going to go through them all because of time constraints today, but you can read through them. And if you ask township officials, which again is our primary audience, you would find decommissioning would get to the top of the list. They kind of go to the end of the story. What happens if, what happens if a company walked away, or what happens if, and you create a lot of different scenarios around that. And we try to work through what are the facts, what do we know, what can we help provide assistance with in that regard, and how can we demonstrate that even with a virtual tour? Meaning, looking at it as it's being constructed, it helps you to understand what you might need to decommission at the end. But if we ask the broader public, where the pushback seems to be with the public, is they just don't want to see it. It's a view shed issue. So then that leads to a lot of other things, how to screen it out. We'll talk about some of that, and how to fence it, where to place it, and how to think about dual use type technologies as we work through that. We also, in the programs that we do, we talk about the solar drivers, and again, you can see a long list there, but it's this idea of why are we, why here, why now? Why such large scale solar in Pennsylvania? Why is this not just in Florida or New Mexico or California? And it's in all those places, but it's also in Alaska and Montana and Vermont. The reality is there's enough sunlight in most locations across the US where large scale solar can be set up. So it's a matter of how to find a place for that, if that's what we want to do within our respective communities and jurisdictions to make that happen. But there's a lot of things driving this, reshoring of industry, and certainly the conversation about data centers and the increased use of electric going forward is going to be a big part of the story, and certainly driving the conversation when we think about solar, just like it drove the conversation back to where I started when we think about natural gas. Not going to spend, again, a lot of time on the different scales of solar, other than to make real quick comments there that accessory, that residential and commercial could be solar on top of a school or near a light industrial building or something of that nature, and certainly rooftop when we think about homes within our respective communities. But when we get beyond that, we also want to be thinking about these larger type systems that are out there. The systems are going to be typically measured in dozens of acres, or hundreds of acres. Now we're starting to see some of them move to 1,000+ acres. So they're kind of the bookends that are out there. Beyond that, we also want to keep in mind that there's a kind of a new scenario that we hadn't seen in the past. This community solar idea is not actually allowed in Pennsylvania. We would need a legislative change to allow for that to occur within the state. But we're seeing these large net metering type facilities that are showing up. Typically, these are 3 megawatts or less. This is kind of a quirk in Pennsylvania law that allows for this to happen, but we're seeing many of these show up. And if you represent a township and there's a knock at your door looking for a permit, it's likely going to be one of those, although it could be any of the others. So the point that I'm trying to make is when we think about ordinance development and the different components that go into that, we're trying to reflect on those, and we're trying to bring those details and those comments into that dialogue. As we try to mitigate, again, what some of the concerns are at the local level, one of the things that I hear consistently, every meeting that I do, when we're working with township officials, they always will say to me when you ask, well, what are the concerns? What are the issues? Where do you see opportunities with solar? Ultimately, they ask the question, but what's in it for us? We understand from the landowner's perspective, they're getting a lease or getting some income from that. Maybe the farmer is getting, something out of that if they're maintaining it as well. Certainly there's opportunity there, no question. But townships are asking, what about community benefit? What about some sort of collective action and collective benefit? And that's becoming a bigger part of the challenge and a big part of the conversation. And you'll hear a lot more about that as we go forward. So stay tuned for that there are certainly many opportunities that way. Some of the things that we get into, I'm kind of moving now into the ordinance piece, which is, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the mainstay of the work that I do. Here's a list of some of the things that I most typically do. A solar ordinance, typically you're looking at something that's about 10 to 13 pages, a lot of legalese, a lot of ordinance language trying to get to the right place. But these are the top things that seem to float out into the conversation of where I spend most of my time. Decommissioning, mentioned a moment ago. You know, how do we think about decommissioning? How do we think about the end of the story? If we're writing a story, in this case, it's going to last 25, 30, 50, 60 years. If there's some extensions that typically are in that story, how do we mitigate some of those components in there? And how do we place the right language to make sure that we end up with the scenario that we want to end up with over the course of time? There's financial considerations, there's cultural considerations, there's restoration, land restoration considerations in there. There's a lot of pieces. So those are some of the things that we work on when we think about that. If I go back to the commentary from local folks, whether they're local constituents within a township, or they're township supervisors, or county planners, or county commissioners, one of the things that I typically hear is about land transition. We hear about farmland, and a lot of solar right now, unless it's rooftop, a lot of the solar that we're seeing is being developed on ag land. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. And one of the things that we get into, again, maybe back to the presentation with the last panel, is the food idea. So how can we bring something that's a dual use technology and produce energy above the land, as well as agriculture, maintain some level of agriculture on the ground? So that would be agrivoltaics as we typically define it. I like to frame it away from agrivoltaics and talk about dual use, because as planners, and I'm a planner myself in a township, we often think about any type of use that's coming at us, any type of development that might be reaching our desk for us to consider is a terminal use of that property. But when we think about solar in this case, it's typically something that has a lifespan, meaning eventually that's going to be pulled off of the landscape and it's going to go back to something else. It may in the end be the terminal use, but on the other hand, going into it, most companies and most landowners that are thinking about this, think about it as multi-generational, but eventually it's going to revert back to what it was or something of that nature. So we try to think about, well, then how do we protect the soil? How do we think about some of those agricultural considerations? And how do we think about this from a dual use type scenario? So that's a key part. We also, again, the thought that I mentioned before about most people's objection to solar, if it's large scale, not rooftop, but large scale, is they don't want to see it. So screening is a big aspect. And we see some examples out there of screening done very poorly. And those are things that we try to bring to the table and try to help communities that are thinking about this, not just fencing it in, which is key as well, but also how to screen it out and how to do that in a way that makes a lot of sense. So we show examples. There's a couple that we have from up in New York State over the course of 3 years. This would be an example of something that I would say was done very poorly. So using them as examples, we help township supervisors to think about, well, then how can we do it right? How can we design it so that we're going to block out that view, if that's what most of the objection is, if we're going to allow this larger scale solar within our communities? We think about fencing. Again, what does it look like? Does it look industrial? Which obviously it does in many cases. How can we change the look of the fence? How can we change the elevation of the panels? What about the vegetation that's around it and in it? How can we deal with some of those things as well? And also, how can we make sure that there is security there? This is a power plant. We don't think about it that typically in most cases. It's a power plant. It's just spread out across the landscape. But that said, there's electrical components in there, and we shouldn't have people just wandering through there. So we need to make sure there's good security. We need to make sure there's good signage, that people understand that they shouldn't go in there unless they're trained to go in there. We need to make sure that we're thinking about the first responder community as well, that equally they're trained if there's some sort of a situation that they need to go in to respond, a fire, human emergency, whatever that might mean, and that they're also trained before the operation is actually up and running. So all the many things that we talk about when we think about the training with township officials and county planners and others in that regard. So with that, it's a real quick, again, I normally do 3 hours around that and really dive into the weeds. You're getting the 15-minute segment. So I'll stop with that. My contact information, if there's anybody that would like to go further in that regard, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you again so much for that, Tom. All right, up next, we have Amelia Eggan from who is the Assistant Director for the Pennsylvania Solar Center, working primarily in the Get Solar program. That's GET Solar program. Amelia assists organizations and communities with solar feasibility analyses and the PA Solar Center team with program organization and development, and leads the team's outreach initiatives throughout southwestern Pennsylvania. Amelia also leads the volunteer PA Solar Corps program that maps out the solar potential of communities. Amelia received a BA in Applied Anthropology from Pennsylvania University of Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and more recently a Master's of Sustainability from Chatham's Falk School for Sustainability, focusing on sustainable community development and program or project management. Thank you, Amelia.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will also rapid fire through this. I was here last year, so thank you very much for inviting me back again. Some of what I will have here is a little bit of a repetition from last year because I love what we do, so we're going to talk about it again. But I also wanted to try to incorporate a couple new ideas, a couple of topics that have really been reoccurring throughout the year. So the Pennsylvania Solar Center, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our vision is we envision a world powered by energy that is reliable, affordable, and sustainable for all. And our mission is to provide trusted guidance to usher all Pennsylvanians into the clean energy economy to reach a sustainable and resilient tomorrow. We are based here in Southwest PA in Pittsburgh, but we do operate throughout the state. But I love Indiana, so anytime you ask me to come here, I will be here. So we are generously supported by mostly the foundation community in Pittsburgh, but also a couple of industry developers. We have a small but mighty team. We've got about 10 people doing a lot of work. We have something like 400 projects in our queue all throughout the state of various sizes. We are in high demand, which I think just emphasizes how much interest there is in solar throughout the state. So we kind of have a three-tier approach. We do education. We have some resources online. We have Watson Learn, which is a monthly series that you can come to if you are interested in different solar topics. We have a really great newsletter that kind of highlights some of the different solar news going on in the state, and our LinkedIn is very active and a lot of other resources online. I suggest you browse our website. Policy and education and advocacy, our executive director, her name is Sharon Pillar. She is one of the leaders of solar policy in Pennsylvania. And we also have some useful guides on our website about like what are some of the different topics and what's some of the different legislation and how do we kind of feel about it based on our kind of specific position from the commercial standpoint, commercial energy standpoint. So I'm going to take a step back real quick. So we focus on the commercial sector. So Tom was speaking mostly about the utility sector. So again, that's really power stations. We're talking about renewable energy power stations, kind of large scale solar development, wind. If you see those wind farms out in New Stanton and stuff, that's all at the transmission level. So that's the utility scale. I'll be speaking more to the commercial scale, which is, we don't do residential at the solar center. Our niche is commercial, which is everything from mom and pop pizza shops all the way up to schools and municipalities. So like I spend a lot of time at municipal board meetings and school board meetings, but I'm also talking to a lot of small business owners. So we kind of do everything in between there. Part of the reason why we were able to do solar in Pennsylvania and why it's profitable is because of a law called net metering. So essentially you're looking at your solar project on a year-long view. You are connected into the grid. So if the grid goes down, you also lose electricity unless you have a small battery backup. We're not going to get into that today, but long story short, your solar panel is connected into the grid. So you're looking at it at a year-long view. So you're trying to size a system that is going to produce as much energy as you consume over a year. It then acts like a bank account where you really build up these credits over the summer, and then in the winter, when you're not producing as much, you can draw down on them. So that's why we are able to say, like, you can offset 100% of your energy usage and, you know, offset most of your electricity bill. There's still taxes and stuff like that. But you can offset most of your electricity bill by doing this distributed generation solar, which is kind of more point of use. Another fun fact about solar in Pennsylvania for the net metering is that you actually have a 2-mile radius. So a really great example is the Indiana wastewater treatment plant. I don't know if you all have heard about their solar project. So we helped them to identify a couple of different options. They own a plot of land that is about a mile away from the actual wastewater treatment plant. So we were able to help design a system and put it out to bid, and their developers are now working with them for the financing, and actual installation should occur soon. But all that to say that it's a mile from where the actual consumption is. So you have a 2-mile radius as the crow flies. So especially for rural schools, what we've learned is that that gives a lot, you know, more variability and a lot of leeway. So reasons to go solar and solar financing, it creates predictable energy costs. It can free up money to serve your mission, and the incentives are really good right now. But I really want to hammer home on this. It creates predictable energy costs. I don't know if you all have seen that your electricity bill has gone up since June. It's going to keep going up, and that's happening on the commercial sector. That's happening in your schools and municipalities too. So especially as from a kind of public use standpoint and from a tax exempt organization or municipalities, this is really kind of about budget stability and you know, making sure that you are fiscally responsible with the taxpayer dollars. So now is a good time to go solar still. There are some changes in the Inflation Reduction Act that I'll talk about, but it's still available. And so this was really novel. It was placed into service, or it was voted on in 2022. And what's unique about this one is that it gives tax exempt entities tax credits. So everyone who does a solar project is eligible for a 30% tax credit, even if you're a tax exempt entity. It acts similarly to a tax process, but it's kind of the best time to go solar because of those incentives. And there are a lot of financing opportunities, not as many as we would love to see. Some of them have been taken away, but there are still some really good financing opportunities that are available. And again, electricity costs have been rising dramatically. So I'd like to focus on this chart if you can see it. This is actually residential rates, but commercial rates are reflective of this as well. Essentially at the grid level, so we are all a part of the PJM. It is like the largest grid in the world. It's the whole mid-Atlantic. And so whenever they do bargaining auctions for, you know, at this electricity is going to, you know, be this cost, and there's a supply and demand there. The auctioning rates for that went up like 200%, which means that all of those costs come back onto us. So that's why we're seeing some of these electricity rates increasing. And part of that is an increased grid demand. And part of that is from data centers. I am not a data center expert. I am just trying to highlight the fact that, you know, there's just a kind of restraint of supply and demand right now. We're seeing that data centers are really, really accelerating the demand for electricity, and there's not enough supply of new utility scale projects coming online. And so there's just this supply and demand constraint right now, which is why our electricity prices are rising so dramatically. They did that capacity auction again, and it again went up the same percentage, like 200% or something like that. So we're going to see the same chart here, the same percentage that it went up starting this year. It's going to do that again next year. I'm sorry to tell you that. So again, all of this kind of leads to, it's still a really great time to go solar because the electricity prices are quite volatile. So you can pay for solar either through cash purchase. That's the best. If you got the cash, just go for it. But there are a lot of really great financing opportunities and a unique opportunity we call power purchase agreements. loan programs is going to be what most organizations are using. I know that the Indiana wastewater treatment plant was able to use this rural water financing agency program. I was recently on a webinar where they were talking and they said this is the most poorly named name for a program. It's not for rural organizations and it's not just for water organizations. If you are a school municipality tax exempt entity, you can probably apply for this and it's about 4.5% loan. And the way that they usually structure the loans is that your payment towards the loan is lower than what your electricity bill would be. So once you pay down the loan, you then, if you're able to, size to 100% of your use, you're then just kind of, you've got your solar and you don't have to worry about that electricity bill for the rest of the project's life. But all that to say that, there are some good loan programs that are available. Long-term power purchase agreements. This one's a really unique financing structure. It's essentially where you are leveraging capital funds. And so a developer owns and maintains the system and kind of sells that energy back to you, just like they're the, West Penn Power or Duquesne Light. They're almost acting like your electricity provider. Usually this is kind of for larger systems. So we see something like 80 to 90% of schools throughout the country are using this type of financing structure because it's no upfront cost. So you negotiate a price that's lower than your regular electric bill, and then you're going to be able to know exactly what you're paying for the lifetime of the system. So again, it's kind of fiscal responsibility. There are some programs in Pennsylvania to do this at the much smaller level too. So part of our work at the PA Solar Center is to try to identify some of the CDFIs and unique organizations that are doing interesting projects and kind of work those levers a little bit more. I wanted to highlight the RISE PA grant. It is an industrial decarbonization grant. Right now, you can still apply for the small and medium tract. It is for-profit businesses that are manufacturers. Their definition of manufacturing is that you alter a product. So that does apply to a lot of food manufacturers and like breweries and things like that. So it's pretty widely eligible if you're a small business, and it's 50% of the project cost, and then those federal tax credits stack on top of it. Speaking of federal tax credits, these got changed a lot since the last time I saw you guys. With the reconciliation bill that happened this summer, this timeline went from 2032 to 2027. So right now you can still move forward with the project and expect 30% of that base of the base cost of the project to be reimbursed. It's almost like a reimbursable grant. It comes in the form of a tax if you're for profit, but if you're a tax exempt entity, it's essentially a reimbursable grant. Indiana County, all of Indiana County is also considered an energy community because of the historic fossil fuel industry. And so that's 40% for all of Indiana County. And then most developers are able to meet this 10% domestic content bonus credit. So I believe the wastewater treatment project is getting 50% back because they were able to get the domestic content credit as well. And there's another bonus for tax or for-profit entities. So again, this timeline was very dramatically altered recently. Long story short is that if you can get a project, if you already have a project going, try to contract and get 5% of the project down by the end of this year. If not, try to do it by July 4th next year. If you can't meet that timeline, you then have until December 31st, 2027 to install that project. Place into service is essentially that it's installed and connected to the grid. But starting in 2028, if you haven't met any of these timelines, you no longer are eligible for these federal tax credits. And as I mentioned, we thought we had till 2032. So now a lot of people who have been solar curious, rather than thinking they have, almost 10 more years, now have 2 years. So a lot of developers are getting flooded right now. So if you are thinking about doing a solar project, I suggest reaching out to us. We have our Get Solar program. This is where I mostly work. We've helped install 20 projects across the Commonwealth. That has leveraged $15.7 million in savings and will then kind of spin out into about more than 21 million in savings over 25 years for all of these projects. So our technical assistance team, we work throughout the whole state, but we have priority in Southwest Pennsylvania. We do kind of a wraparound approach. So we kind of take anything in your portfolio, we throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. So this is a school, for example, we can look at all of the rooftops, ground mounts, potentially carports. Those are really cool, but really expensive. And just see like what the different options are within the portfolio. We then can do the actual solar modeling. We take a look at all of your bills, see what you're consuming, what you can offset. We put that into our really fancy Excel calculator that we've developed. And we can kind of understand what your 30-year cash flow for your project would look like, which includes operations and maintenance cost, all of the federal incentives you might be eligible for. There's a couple of state incentives, and then the SREC market, which is just kind of some icing on the cake as far as state incentives go. So we can kind of take a really good snapshot of what your project is. And then if all of that looks good, we can help put it out to bid. And my last thing is that interconnection right now for First Energy is really difficult. It's hard to get a meaningful timeline of what that is. So what that means is that you've selected your developer, they're doing their permits, and they're trying to actually get your project into, the First Energy West Penn power grid. We've recently gotten anecdotal accounts that they've quoted 5 to 6 months to get any sort of permit back. In comparison, Duquesne Light is like 90 days. So all of that to say, for all the reasons I mentioned before, and for this, if you would like to meet that timeline for federal tax incentives, you have to think of this too. So get your projects in now. If you'd like to talk to me, I have open hours every other Thursday from 1 to 2. I'll hopefully share this slide around so you can have that link, or you can just reach out directly to our team. And our great program coordinator, Nick, will get back to you and get all the information you need to get you going. So thank you very much for having me. Sorry that was rough, but
thank you so much again to Tom Murphy, who is working with the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, and Amelia Eggan who's working with PA Solar Center during this period where the solar energy industry is continuing to grow and energy conversations on the forefront of everyone's minds. We really appreciate the assistance and guidance you give our municipal officials and our commercial sector on adopting best practices and capitalizing on these opportunities. And thank you again to Christina, Ali, Scott, and everyone else who helped make this happen today and for having us here.
Time for one question. One question is that if I pick my electric bill and the total cost that I pay, and I divide it by the kilowatt hours that I use, it's more like 22 cents a kilowatt hour. Why do you show 10 or 11 cents?
because part of that is demand charges. So kilowatts rather than kilowatt hour aren't always offset by solar. And part of it is, so the chart I showed there was just specifically the supply rate. If you look on your bill, there's supply, distribution, energy efficiency offset, sometimes like transmission, customer support, default charge. There's a bunch of different charges. So what I was looking, like the chart that I had was just the supply rate. But
those other charges are based on kilowatt hours used. So if you reduce your kilowatt hours, you're going to reduce your total bill.
right.
22 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, so you're gonna, if you take energy efficiency measures, that's the best way to reduce, your energy use. Reducing your energy use is the best, but everyone has energy use. So if you can use solar to offset your kilowatt hours, it'll offset all of those charges.
So it's closer to 22 cents a kilowatt hour.
In some places it is, yeah.
Here in Indiana. And the other question I have is, somebody mentioned today that there is some environmental pollution put off by these solar panels that can contaminate the ground underneath it? Never heard that. And where's that coming from?
There are really effective misinformation campaigns surrounding renewable energy in Pennsylvania.
Hi, in addition to those incentives that you highlighted, are the commercial farm installations still eligible for the accelerated depreciation of the capital costs?
Yes, so
So you can write off the entire project cost in a year.
it's the first 5 years. It's a 5-year
It's
acceleration.
not the accelerated.
It is accelerated depreciation, but it's within the first 5 years and then the schedule changes here. That, I believe, was affected by the reconciliation changes as well. So right now until 2027, yes.